As the ranking member, Mr. Meeks, for an opening statement and questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for allowing me to make my opening statement. As you know, I was with President Ruto and the Speaker. Thank you very much. I'll begin by welcoming Secretary Blinken to the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and I know there's much that has already been talked about and much more that demands your attention all over the world. And I just say, with your travel schedule. Mr. Secretary, I appreciate how generous you've always been with your time and how responsive the department has been to the request made by this committee during your tenure. By my count, this is your 5th appearance before this committee, which is certainly way more than your immediate predecessor. Since you've last testified before us, the geopolitical landscape has only grown in complexity, plagued by continued rise in conflict, democratic backsliding, and humanitarian catastrophes. Hamas's October the 7th terrorist attack, the most horrific and brutal terrorist attack in Israel's history, has prompted a war against Hamas that has now cost tens of thousands of lives, including innocent civilians, children, and women. The people of Gaza now face famine-like conditions, which is why I commend the State Department that this administration's tireless efforts to broker a ceasefire that would free the hostages, which would include 5 Americans, and allow humanitarian aid to reach the population. I appreciate the administration's efforts to caution Israel against launching a large-scale military operation in Rafah without a credible plan for minimizing civilian casualties and stabilizing a post-war Gaza. And we look forward to hearing more from you, Mr. Secretary, on the department's ongoing efforts to address this crisis. Gaza is one of many humanitarian crises around the world, and I know your department remains focused on alleviating human suffering in places like Sudan, where we see the largest number of people facing extreme food shortages in the world. The situation in Haiti has only grown more dire, with Port-au-Prince having devolved into lawlessness, resulting from horrific violence, including systemic sexual violence perpetrated by gangs. And I'm grateful that President Ruto, who I just met with of Kenya, is here in Washington, D.C. this week, as Kenya is not only vital for sustained U.S. engagement with Africa, it is also leading the multinational security support mission to Haiti that is key to promoting stability as Haitians work to restore democratic governance in their country. And since your last testimony, we've also seen Putin's illegal war on Ukraine enter a new deadly phase, as Russian forces pummel civilian infrastructure with warheads on a level not seen since the beginning of the war, and push to once again take Kyiv. Ukraine has fought desperately to hold ground against Russian advances amid shortages in ammunition and defensive weapons, caused largely in part, of course, by the efforts of extreme MAGA Republicans to block the president's national security supplemental. Thankfully, Democrats worked across the aisle to pass the supplemental package, and I look forward to hearing more on how the State Department is working to quickly fulfill deliveries of those arms shipments so that Ukraine can replenish its stockpiles and continue its existential fight against Moscow. And it's clear that the atrocities of the world are the autocracies of the world are coordinating now more than ever to challenge the free democratic world and undermine U.S. interests and the international rules-based system that has for decades promoted peace and prosperity. Under President Biden and your leadership in the State Department, we have strengthened American leadership, revitalized our alliances and our partnerships, as well as forged new cooperative agreements like AUKUS to promote U.S. national security, particularly in the Indo-Pacific. This diplomacy will be pivotal to ensuring the Indo-Pacific remains free, open, and secure, particularly as Beijing is increasing its aggressive actions in the South and East China Seas and the Taiwan Strait, using economic coercion to advance its malign interests. However, we cannot outcompete Beijing diplomatically or economically if we are not willing to make serious investments in our diplomatic and development tools. Which brings me to the reason why you're here today, Mr. Secretary. The Biden administration's FY25 budget is a clear-eyed about the complex challenges we face and is in stark contrast to the America First isolationism of many of my colleagues across the aisle who continue pushing for draconian cuts to the State Department's budget. For all the talk we hear from my Republican colleagues about the need to outcompete China, they seem unwilling to make the prerequisite investments into our state, foreign, and operations and related programs, the budget that needs and meets the moment. So I conclude that with this. Our diplomatic and development personnel in the State Department need Congress to do its job and authorize a budget that makes investments commensurate to their needs and modernizes the State Department to meet the challenges of the 21st century. We need to stand by the State Department. We need state authorization bill passed on a regular basis for the heroes of the State Department, the men, the American men and women who stand, and I salute them. As I salute our military, I salute them for their courage, their bravery, and for being the representative to the United States of America all over the world. And with that, I yield back, and now I guess I can do my questionings. Thank you. So, in the 3.5 years, the administration has realized our alliances, as I just said, in a partnership in the Indo-Pacific in ways that we could not have foreseen a few years ago. Before the Biden administration, the quadrilateral dialogue, I can't even pronounce it, quadrilateral dialogue with Japan.
Say quad.
Say quad, that's right. With Japan, Australia, and India, ever met at the leaders level before the Biden administration? Has the quad, did you have Japan, Australia, and India, did they ever meet at the leaders level?
We elevated the leaders level, that's correct.
And has the AUKUS security partnership with the administration launched with the UK and Australia been a game changer in bolstering deterrence and keeping the peace in the Indo-Pacific?
It's moving in that direction.
And regarding the trilateral partnership with Japan and Korea, are we cooperating with our two Northeast Asian allies in ways that we had not before?
That's correct.
That is correct. And, well, how many countries in the Pacific Islands has the Biden administration expanded our diplomatic footprint?
We now have an additional 2 embassies that have opened. We're looking at an additional 2 more. So we'll have representation in more than half of the Pacific Island countries.
So would you say this is building resiliency against the PRC's malign influence in the Pacific Islands?
Yes, I would.
And how has our relationship with the Philippines rebounded under the Biden administration?
Well, I think we've seen an extraordinary relationship develop especially over the last year, both President Biden, President Marcos, working more closely together than ever. And that partnership, and by the way, you mentioned the trilateral relationship with Japan and Korea. We also now have a trilateral partnership with the Philippines and Japan, where we're doing work together.
And does this cooperation across Asia, does that help ensure a free and open Indo-Pacific?
Absolutely. We've got the most dynamic, fastest growing region in the world. We have more than 50% of global GDP in that region. And of course, the United States is a Pacific power. But being able to align so many different countries, to have all of us working together and in the same direction, that multiplies the impact of our diplomacy. It multiplies the impact we're having on advancing our interests.
Does it counter the PRC's undermining of rules-based order?
Absolutely. And the fact that we're able to do it together makes the difference.
And let me just ask this. Could the United States of America have achieved this cooperation without the State Department?
Well, admittedly, I have a biased view on this, but the answer would be no.
It's a great job that the State Department and this administration is doing. Let me turn to the concerning situation, of course, in Sudan. On May 14th, the administration sanctioned 2 RSF forces commanders for perpetrating violence in Darfur and threatening the peace, security, and stability of Sudan. However, the RSF leader has not been sanctioned. The current fight against the RSF and Sudanese armed forces for the city of Al-Fashir and Darfur risk escalating a humanitarian catastrophe. What's the State Department doing to demand accountability in Sudan?
Well, we're focused on a few things. First, we have, as you know, our senior envoy, Tom Perriello, who is out there every single day trying to drive forward on getting an end to the war, getting a civilian transitional government formed, unifying the professional armed forces, getting unhindered humanitarian access to people who desperately need it, and, of course, returning to the democratic transition that Sudan was on before it was disrupted by the generals. We think the best way forward is to resume the Jeddah negotiations that Saudi Arabia has been hosting with all of the key stakeholders, with the Saudis, with Egypt, with the UAE, with the African Union, with IGAD, and also, yes, as appropriate, to oppose costs on individuals or entities that are escalating the conflict and committing atrocities. So we're very much looking at that as well.
Thank you. Let me also ask this. Is it critical that Congress reauthorize the Global Engagement Center this year?
Yes, and in my judgment it is. In fact, I addressed that in my opening statement. This is this one place in government where we bring together all of our efforts to counter Russian, Chinese, and other disinformation and misinformation. And it's been one of the most effective tools I've seen, both in exposing that disinformation and misinformation, giving other countries the capacity themselves to deal with it, and to take more effective collective action. So, as I mentioned in my opening statement, I very much hope that it will be reauthorized because it sunsets a little bit later this year, and it's a critical tool. If we take that tool away, we are disarming ourselves in the fight against mis and disinformation coming from China, coming from Russia, coming from others.
My last question, is there any merit to the allegations, some from the far right, that the GEC is censoring conservative voices here in the United States?
No. And, of course, we're always prepared to work with Congress on any concerns, as we have. When concerns was raised, we tried to make sure we provided all of the necessary information so that people have confidence, and we'll always continue to do that. But those questions have been answered, and I believe, again, this tool is essential for us in order to deal with what really is a new front in the global competition, and that's the information front. We have to be able to fight effectively on that front.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you for the great work you're doing, and please say thank you to all of the employees of the State Department. I yield back.
Joe O'Neill, the chair recognizes Mr. Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Secretary.